What's up, YouTube? I want to talk about the trends in fragrances because sometimes the year a fragrance is made can have some effect on whether it's a good scent to buy or not. Like, first of all, we're going to talk about the Chapeur category is a kind of an outdated fragrance category because it definitely has a certain amount of dryness and they kind of smell arid. A lot of them smell green, and that was a very elegant style that started out in the early 1900s. And into the 70s, you had scents like Polo Blue and Yavagan Caron, where you'd have some green notes and you'd have some dry woods and spice and a lot of moss. So they definitely had kind of a very masculine, arid kind of feel to it. Now, by today's standards, I'm not so sure if those would work so well with a lot of people, because nowadays everybody wants fresh. And, there's sweet and fresh kind of came out pretty recently. Like, in the 80s, you still had a lot of powerhouse fragrances, and like Quarum and Drac Renard, and a lot of these scents in the 80s were very heavy. They projected a lot. They definitely had a very loud quality to it. And that was kind of, back in the 80s, a lot of those fragrances by today's standards may be a little outdated if they have a lot of leather and a lot of moss. But, some of them are really nice though. And, in the 90s, that's when it really started to pick up. Because then, you had the aquatic trends. Starting with cool water, people started building aquatics. Now, cool water used traditional ocean notes, like seawater, made an actual water smell. And then you had scents like Acqua di Gio that made more of a fougere approach to getting aquatics. Like you have some herbs and, you have some persimmon and peach, and then you have some rosemary. You make it very aromatic and just give it a touch of wood and musk. And you have scents like Issey Miyake that use some sour notes, but a lot more outdoorsy, exotic notes. And, that's where the aquatics started to build up. And also in the 90s, you saw a development of gourmand fragrances like Animale, and Le Mal, and also Amen. But the thing with the gourmands in the 90s is, they've been using a lot of gourmand notes all the time, but the way they were done in the 90s, like you started to have vanilla gourmands after Le Mal. That's when you started to have really powdery vanilla feels to fragrances. And Le Mal really was a trendsetter. It had a lot of clones, it has had a lot of cousins and a lot of copies, and a lot of people want colognes that follow the trends of Le Mal. And Amen also, Amen's really the fragrance that they made off of Animale. And Animale is a drier, it doesn't have the tar or the sensual kind of notes that Amen has. It's kind of the scent of Amen that you could wear to work. It's not as provocative, but, it got down to marketing that Thierry Mugler saw Animale, and knew that it had a lot of popularity, but it had a limited market because it wasn't a big name brand that could get into department stores. So they made their own version of this. And Thierry Mugler started the chocolate gourmand pattern. You have Le Mal going this way with the vanilla and the powderiness, and then you have Thierry Mugler Amen that goes in the other direction and uses chocolate. Like very irresistible Givenchy. And that's when you start to have these gourmands that really took different pathways. And then you had Roca's Man that had more of a chocolate coffee gourmand. Maybe similar notes to Amen. But Roca's Man is not similar to Amen. They're both very different smells because the companies have made them with totally different fragrant perfumiers, and they have made a point of making their own kind of thing with each one. So, that's basically a trend. But then in the late 90s and the 2000s, people, earlier in the 90s, you had a lot of very citrus and fresh stuff. They tended to use fruity notes. But then, late 90s and the early 2000s, you started to have the growth of fougere, where they would take the freshness of the 90s, and they would add some heavy notes, and they would add some oriental notes, so that way it would be kind of in the middle, because it would be fresh and spicy at the same time. Because a lot of times in the 90s you had scents for daytime that were very fresh and fruity and aquatic, and then you had your scents for the nighttime, which were very spicy and heavy and sweet. and they kind of combined them, and they took some of the fruity notes. They make some fougères that have a very fruity smell nowadays, but they have that amber and musk in the dry down. As it dries down, it stays kind of linear, but the amber and musk gives it warmth and puts it in the Oriental category. But in my opinion, they're still fougères because they're a medley of these different ingredients, and they're not in one category as much as, they're kind of in multiple categories. And, after 2000, this is where, you get scents like Unforgivable. Aromatic fougère. You have some bright citrus. We get some bergamot, which gives kind of a sweet citrus, but it's a nice wall of citrus. Very fresh and bright and invigorating. And then you get some sweetness and you get some booziness to it, maybe semi-gourmandish when you get the rum note. And then, the woods and the musk take over in the dry down. And, there is some amber and tonka bean in that one, that gives it just a little bit of sensuality as it dries down. And that's one of them, but also a lot of, Calvin Klein made a lot of stuff in the 90s. And it had a very fresh, fruity kind of opening with a little bit of wood in the dry down. Skin scents, definitely daytime stuff. And Obsession was very heavy, powerhouse oriented with a lot of lavender. It's an 80s kind of thing. And nowadays, people kind of combine everything. A good modern scent is Ed Hardy Love and Luck because it's an Oriental fougère. They call it Oriental because it has some exotic notes in it and it has some warmth to it. It's kind of sweet, but it has a very fresh feel to it. And a lot of people find it very fruity because it does have some fruity notes. They're pretty prominent, but it's not in the fruity category because we have combined this with some spices and woods and musk and sensual ingredients, and you kind of have a hybrid scent that's in multiple categories. That's just one of them. Or Roquefort 99. That's another modern type. You get the woody aromatic. You get some fruits, but then you get some woods and musk and amber. And a lot of scents nowadays are actually developing into the woody category. So the fougère and woody scents are much more modern. And, with woods, you get some smoky woods, and then you get some fresher woods. Depending on the type of wood, that's really a big thing. Cedar is kind of a drier wood, where sandalwood is a little more exotic and sensual, depending on the type of sandalwood. And patchouli really has a strong smell. I mean, I don't know if I like patchouli that much unless it's balanced and mixed in with something else, because it can be really kind of pungent, like incense pungent smell. Very exotic. It smells like a head shop sometimes. But, you also get mahogany and rosewood have a much richer smell. And agarwood has a very resinous, almost spicy smell, depending on the type. And agarwood actually has been used a lot in the Middle Eastern fragrance market for a long time. So agarwood has a lot of history. And, wormwood gives kind of an absinthe smell. And then you have your mossy components, like oak moss and laudanum and all different types of that can make a Chapeur kind of smell, but they can also dry a fragrance and give more masculinity. By today's standards, the fougères tend to be very popular. I mean, the citrus is still being made, but people tend to build onto the citrus, and they give it some depth. So it's not just a fresh, fruity scent of the 90s. And a lot of times nowadays, they're taking other fruity notes than citrus. They're using melon, they're using tropical fruits, pineapple, persimmon, red berries, and they're using all kinds of stuff to put together. And, in dry downs, people are using vanilla and tonka bean. You have different types of dry downs these days. You can have your powdery vanilla woods, or you can have your rich, full-bodied woods, or you can have kind of a fresh woods or musky woods. It really is taking a lot of different paths. And so, honestly, I think fragrances need to get more original now. I think they're constantly borrowing from each other now. But one of the things about it is, with spices, traditionally spices were used to really dry out and give heaviness to a fragrance and really give a strong smell. Then in the 90s, the word aromatic came in, where you make very fresh scents. And the aromatic means you get some citrus, and then you get some pepper, and the black pepper really gives it, a little bit of freshness, and the spices really give it kind of a little bit of depth to keep it from being boring. So, I mean, like Michael Jordan did a good job of that, and Calvin Klein oftentimes makes a lot of very aromatic scents. And basically, different spices do a different job. Like cinnamon can be very fruity smelling. It can be sweet, almost like a fruity aroma. It definitely depends on the type of cinnamon they're using and where it's from. Because, cinnamon can be kind of a candied smell, like in 1,000,000. It can be, very sweet, like in Joe Bomb, or it can be, kind of balanced out with other ingredients. I mean, like Le Male has cinnamon and vanilla. So the cinnamon and vanilla in Le Male are very sensual in that. I mean, it's a very dirty fragrance. And you have cumin. Cumin is the number one dirty stuff in fragrance. If you want a dirty, sensual scent, look for cumin out of all the notes. I mean, cumin and the musk and the amber and the tonka bean and the vanilla really are what make Le Male very sensual and very dirty, especially with the sandalwood. I mean, it has nothing but sensual ingredients to it. It's like sex in a bottle to a lot of people. And, on the other hand, you get some spices that are drier and that are much richer. Like you can get some nutmeg, and you can get, other very aromatic ingredients. Like some of the clove can actually give more of exotic smells, but it can also be sweet depending on how it's used. But one thing that's really good is Toulouse balsam. And Toulouse balsam helps boost the smell of spices. It doesn't smell like any specific spice, but it really, really does a good job. I mean, it's one of those things, like it's an opium pour all, and it's amazing scent. I mean, it really has an amazing smell in that fragrance. And overall, I mean, the use of spices can really make a scent very nice if it's used right. But some scents have weird spices, like Gravity by Coyote. You had lavender, and then you had pepper, and then all of a sudden you had woods. It like opens up like some weird dry down, and then it dries down like some weird opening. It's like, I never got into that one, but there's always good and bad uses of everything depending on the scent. You just got to find what you want to smell like and what kind of chemistry you have with it. So that's it, and thanks for watching.